Only God can acknowledge someone's faith. What does that mean? Like only God can tell if somebody has faith or not. Let me give two scenarios before we dive into the seven things I want to talk about faith today. The first one was all over the Bible. The Pharisees, they thought they had faith because of what they did, but we see Jesus rebuking them all over the Bible and saying, "No, you are not expressing faith. You are just doing things to look good. You are not expressing faith." They thought they were expressing faith, but Jesus rebuked them. He told them, "You are not expressing faith. You are just doing things to look good before people." Number two, if you read Matthew chapter 8, the Roman soldier, the Roman official who was there, he thought he was just respecting protocol and the authority of this Jewish rabbi by telling Jesus, "You don't need to come to my house to heal my servant. You can just say a word and my servant will be healed wherever he is." He thought he was just respecting protocol, because he was a soldier. Jesus told him, "No, you are actually expressing faith. That is faith that we are talking about. So it's very funny. The ones who thought they were expressing faith, Jesus rebuked them. And the one who thought he was just respecting protocol, Jesus acknowledged him and he said, "That is faith. It is not just protocol. And we see many other examples like Luke 18:10-14. When again a Pharisee and a tax collector, they go to pray in the temple. And you know what Jesus says? The Pharisee again is not justified before God, and the tax collector is more justified. Despite of the fact that the Pharisee was doing things that would look good. He was fasting twice a week. He was paying tithe. He was saying all the good things he was doing, but he was not justified before God. And on the other side, the tax collector was a corrupt government official. But Jesus says he was more acknowledged before God than the friend who was in front. So what does this teach us about faith? What does this teach us about faith? And I think we are going to look at 7 things this whole thing can teach us about faith. Remember? Because here we have the Pharisees. They thought they were expressing faith by doing what they did. But Jesus was like, "No, you are just doing these things to look good for your own benefit, but not for faith." And you have a Roman soldier who thought he was just respecting protocol. And Jesus said, "In Israel, I have not found anyone with much faith like this man." Okay? So what does this teach us about faith? The first thing I think this teaches us about faith is unconditional. What does that mean? We always talk about the unconditional love of God and His grace, and all that. Yes, it is true. The love of God is unconditional. But you also forget to talk about the unconditional faith and belief in God that unlocks that kind of grace. Because remember, we are saved by grace through faith. Ephesians 2:8. We are saved by grace through faith. So yes, we have the unconditional love of God, but we also have the unconditional faith that can unlock that love. The unconditional faith that can bring about salvation. So true faith is non-negotiable. It is not negotiable. It's not about negotiation. It is non-negotiable. It's not a negotiation with God. True faith is not a negotiation with God. You don't say, "I will believe when the circumstances are right." You don't say, "I will believe when this happens or when this does not happen." You don't say, "I will believe when I finally feel worthy and righteous to believe." Right now I'm not perfect. I cannot believe. Like true faith doesn't do that. True faith says, "I will believe whether I feel perfect or not. I will believe whether I feel worthy or not. I will believe whether the circumstances feel right or not. True faith transcends circumstances. That is a true faith. You're talking about. It is not circumstantial. So that's what we need to remember. It's good to sing about the unconditional love of God, and it is true. The love of God is unconditional. So if God doesn't need us to be perfect in order for Him to love us, Why do we need to be perfect in order to believe in Him? Why do you wait to be perfect in order for you to believe in Him? True faith doesn't ask for conditions, just like the true love of God doesn't ask for conditions, And true faith doesn't give conditions, It is total trust and total surrender, Total trust and total surrender, and so just like God doesn't give conditions on His love for us, we shouldn't give conditions on our faith, Our faith should not be for sale, And I think Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, in Daniel chapter 3, 18, they teach us this, What do they say before they throw them into the fire? They say, even if God does not save us, we shall not worship that idol, Like even if God does not save us. So their faith didn't depend on God saving them. Yet God saved them at the end. But they were like, even if God does not save us, like we shall always continue believing. So you see, that's the first thing I think. Like true faith is non-negotiable and it is not conditional, If God doesn't ask for everything to be perfect, for Him to love us, we should not also ask for everything to be perfect for us to believe in Him. That's number one. The second thing this teaches us about faith, is that faith is not what it looks like, It's not what it looks like, because if somebody was watching from a distance, in this Bible story, maybe they would say, the Pharisees had more faith than the Roman soldier because of what the Pharisees did, And Jesus rebuked them, Jesus told them, like, you are just acting, you are not showing faith, Before you give charity to somebody on the streets, you first ring a bell for people to see that. Jesus was like, no, like faith is not like that, So faith is not normally what it looks like, It is not a religious group, Faith is not making big and bold proclamations, Faith is not having confidence, Faith is not doing much in the name of God, You think we are doing this in the name of God. No, that's not faith, And faith is not as many things as we think it is. And faith is more personal than we think, It is a more personal affair than we think, It is more personal, and it's more personal between God and the believer, and it is deeper than we think. And that's why only God can acknowledge faith. That's why no one else can acknowledge faith apart from God Himself only. So others may see the signs of faith, others may see the fruits of faith. They may see signs, but they cannot. It's only God who can acknowledge, because the signs can be faked, the signs can be acted out. But when the heart is not, in line with what you are acting, So again, faith is more personal than we think, and it is deeper than we think. So it's difficult for us to see it with our own eyes. It's only God who can see faith, Other people cannot see it, And if a human being was a tree, I think faith would be the roots. And then the works that we do would be the fruits. The works would be the fruits. Everyone can see the fruits, but the roots that hold the fruits, few people can see. Or let me say, only God can see, not even few people. So that's the second thing we learn about faith. We said the first was faith is unconditional. The second, we see faith is not what it looks like. Faith is, and there are many people you may look at who may look like they don't have faith, yet they have faith. And others may look like people of faith, yet God says they don't have faith. You know what I'm saying? The same thing with the Pharisees and the Roman soldier, So faith is not on the surface, it is deep inside. That's why only God can acknowledge it, because it's only God who sees deep inside. So this is not an excuse for people not to act, for people not to live like people of faith. It should even empower you to live with what is in your heart, what comes from, the faith that comes from inside. Faith is inside out, not outside in. Okay. The third one, the third one is faith is not a performance. We said there are 7 things we are going to talk about faith, what this whole thing teaches us, So the third one is faith is not a performance, Again, based on Matthew 6, we learn that faith shouldn't be a performance. And in Matthew 6 is where Jesus, tells us that's important, teaching. He says, when you are praying, don't pray in the public for everyone to see you like the hypocrites, like go and pray, in your room, even God can hear you from there, When you are giving alms, don't first sound a bell for everyone to see that you're doing charity, Jesus says, no, like that is not faith, that is just performance, And equally, he says, when you're fasting, you don't put ashes on your face and, you look, annoyed and you quarrel because you're fasting. No, like Jesus says, actually do the opposite. Anoint yourself with oil and don't be gloomy. That's what faith. So it teaches us that faith is not a performance. It's not a mask that we put on to be accepted. By other people, by God. No, it is more than that. And in life we have things we have to do, We have things we have to do and things we want to do. There are two things in life normally. There are things we want to do and things we have to do to survive, Two categories of things. So in most cases, you find that the things you have to do to survive, in most cases, people just perform those things. You do them as a performance because they just do them to, to complete the task so that you can survive, But on the other side, the things that we want to do, those are the things that bring out our true selves, Those are the things that make people feel alive and their true self comes out. But when you are doing the things you have to do, you perform them. It's just a performance. But the things you want to do, it is more than a performance. It's an experience. It's a lived thing. It's the real you coming out. So on the other side also, what breaks my heart in most cases is that if you look at even in society, in most cases, people will go through life like performing, putting on a mask and performing all over the place, which I'm not completely against, which I have no problem with. If you have to perform, sometimes you do things when you don't feel like. Maybe you can go to the gym when you don't feel like, but it helps your health. Maybe you can go to work when you don't feel like, but you are going to get paid at the end of the day. So, in most cases, what I say is, when you end up performing something, you obstruct the real you. Like you put on a persona or you put on a mask. That is not the real you, just to perform, And it's a survival mode, It's something like a survival mode. So, what breaks my heart is that people think they have to deal with God like that also, which is which is crazy and not true, because you go through life performing so that the world can, give you something back for your performance. But that's not what you do when you go before God, When you go before God, you don't do that, because God can see through all of us, So you cannot deceive God, you cannot lie to God, you cannot manipulate God because God can see through us. So that's why I say faith is not a performance. You cannot just perform it, you can just, because God is not looking for a performance from you. God is looking for the real you. That's what God is looking for. That part of yourself that you don't want to, that you fear to show to everyone else, that part of yourself that you don't want, people to see, maybe you look vulnerable or what. That is the part that God is looking for. That is the part that God is looking for. That's where God wants to start his work with the real you, So the sooner you stop performing that's when God will start to work, So God is not looking for a persona or something. That's how you cannot put on a show of praise or good works to impress God. It can't be. So God is looking for the real you, And I don't care whether your true self feels unworthy right now, whether your true self feels fearful, whether it feels weak or inadequate, whether you feel confident, I don't care what the real you feels like. Just take that to God. Take the real you. Surrender him or her to God, and let God start to do his work, because God honors the imperfect truth more than the perfect performance or the perfect lie that you try to put together, because He's a God of truth. And remember, like, God is not a boss or a customer who you need to impress to get something from. God is not a customer or a boss. God is a parent who honors a truthful relationship with his children. Is a parent who wants to have a real relationship with his children. Not a boss or a customer who's looking to be impressed so that he can give you something after you have impressed him. So God is not like that. So that's why faith is not performance. And that's if you try to perform faith, you will always end up getting frustrated until the real you comes up and God starts to work with that. So don't perform faith. Just bring the real you and surrender the real you to God, because you don't have to put on a mask to deal with God. You can see through that. You can do that with the world, you cannot do that with God, So that's the third one. So what's the fourth one, The fourth one, I think, was what I said earlier, it's only God who can acknowledge faith. So that's the fourth we learn from this, Because where are we getting this from? We are getting this from what I told you at the beginning of the video, The Pharisees did everything right. They did everything and they thought, they were faithful. But Jesus was like, no, you are not faithful. You are hypocrites. You are just doing things for other people, to praise you, but not to glorify God. Then on the other side, there was one Roman soldier who came and thought was just respecting protocol. Just told Jesus, you don't need to come to my house, Just say a word and my servant will get healed. And Jesus was like, wait a minute, this is real faith, This is real faith. You are not just respecting protocol. You are actually acknowledging real faith. You are showing real faith. So again, what does this teach us, So that's what we are trying to go through, That if for us we had looked at it, maybe even me, all of us, maybe would have said the Pharisees had more faith because of what they were doing, And we'd have said the Roman soldier is just a man of discipline, He's just a disciplined soldier. But Jesus was like, no, it's actually the other way around, These ones who are doing religious things and, fasting and doing what, which are not bad things, by the way. They are just performing the fruits of faith, but they don't have the roots. But this Roman soldier, who everyone thinks is just showing discipline, is actually showing much faith, So, number 4, as we are saying, only God can acknowledge faith. Like, what does that mean, It means it's not the believer who can acknowledge faith, not those around the believer, not even the religious leaders. It's God and God alone who can acknowledge faith, And what this means is that when it comes to things of faith, it is God that has the final say, not man. So let's direct our faith towards God, not a religion, not an organization, not a human being or something else. Let it be towards God, Let it be towards God, because it's only God who can acknowledge faith, It's only God who can acknowledge faith. That's why even the Bible says, some will come on the last day and they will say, Lord, Lord, we did this in your name. And what will Jesus say? Jesus said, we tell some of them, like, I did not know you. I see. I did not know you, like, depart from me. So it's God who can acknowledge faith. And it's only God who can do that. So remember that it's more personal and it's deeper than we think, It's deeper than we think. So don't let anyone tell you don't have faith. And don't let anyone tell you have more faith. Let it be two-sided. It's only God who can say you have more faith. And it's only God who can say, come on, you don't have faith like you think, you see. So our faith should be directed towards God, because the Bible calls him the searcher of hearts. So number 5, we are going. Number 5. Yes, faith without works is dead. They say that. But on the other side, also, works without faith are also dead as well. So that's number 5. That's what this teaches us, the fifth thing, Faith without works is dead. That is true. But works without faith are also dead. as well. Let us dive into this one also. Faith is supposed to produce works, but not the other way around. Works can produce faith. The works can't produce faith. Works only produce self-righteousness and false confidence. And we see that with the Pharisees all over the Bible. You cannot start with works and you end up with faith. No, you start with faith and then you end up with works. The same way, we are not saved by works, we are saved by faith, but we are saved so that we can do the good works. So we are not saved by good works so that we can have faith. I know, like, I may have, mix it. So some of you may have get confused this, but we understand it as we go deeper and deeper. Faith comes from surrender and trust. It comes from surrender and trust. And let me give you an example to make you understand this more. Why do you think St. Paul, a man who preached salvation by faith and faith alone, why do you think he ended up doing more works than most of the apostles? It is said in the Bible like he did more works actually. He did more works, did more things. But he spent all his time talking about faith, not works. Faith. We are saved by faith, not works. But he did more works. The same thing with Jesus. Jesus was a man of faith. But he hated legalism, He hated works. He hated people who preached works and legalism. And there's something about men of faith, like the men of faith actually, they hate legalism more than even they hate sin actually. It's something like, and I'm not saying like, we should take sin lightly, but the men of faith, they actually talk more against self-righteousness and legalism more than sin. Jesus criticized the self-righteous, Pharisees more than he criticized sinners. We see the same thing with St. Paul. He reaches a moment whereby he tells the Galatians, "You foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you? Who has bewitched you, you foolish Galatians?" And even tells them, those who are telling you that you should be circumcised in order for you to receive salvation, they should even add castration. He was so annoyed. And he told them it is only Christ and only faith in Christ that brings salvation. Why are you trying to add works onto salvation? The men of faith always criticize righteousness and self-righteousness and works more than they criticize sin. Why? Because thinking that anything other than faith can save you, actually it does more damage to you more than even sin can do. And I'm not saying you should take sin lightly again, I hope you are mature enough to know this. But thinking that something else can save you more than faith in God is actually more dangerous than sin, because that takes you on a way of trying to save yourself, trying to do things to save yourself. And what happens? You get frustrated. And what happens when you get frustrated? You become resentful towards God. You resent God. What happens when you resent God? You don't want anything to do with God anymore. What happens when you don't want anything to do with God anymore? You become an enemy of God, even without knowing. I see. So if you try to save yourself, that's what happens. You fail actually. You fail badly. The same thing with St. Paul. St. Paul, when he was still Saul, what happened to him? He was trying to win the favor of God by persecuting the Christians, because he thought he was doing God a service, until he met Jesus on the road to Damascus. And Jesus was like, "No, you are doing the opposite." I think you are doing the opposite. What happened? He looked around and he thought, "Okay, I've failed. I've failed to save myself. I've failed to do things to please God." But Jesus ends up showing him more grace than he had ever seen, because he thought it was the end for him when he missed Jesus, and Jesus told him, "You have been persecuting me." St. Paul at that moment thought it was the end of his life. He thought it was disaster for him, but Jesus picked him up. And that's why he preached about grace until he was killed, because he would see that it was not anything that he did that saved him. It was the grace of God, and he had to believe, He had to believe that Jesus had set him free. That's why he ended up doing more works than all the apostles. He started more churches than all the apostles, and he did more works, but he preached grace and faith more than works. And the works he did, they came from faith, I see. But the works he did at first before the road to Damascus, before meeting Jesus, those works were just works without faith. That's why all those works were dead. But the works St. Paul did after meeting Jesus on the road to Damascus, those works were fruits of faith. That's why those works were alive. And that's why those works are still alive even up to today. He wrote most of the New Testament, and what he wrote is still bearing fruit in the kingdom of God up to today. But the things he did before that, they didn't bear any fruit up to now, I think. So that is it. So don't depend on works, depend on faith, okay? And when you depend on faith, faith will produce actually works that will continue to bear fruit even after you've left this world. But if you depend on works alone, your works will not go that far. So yes, that's the fifth thing we learn. Faith without works is dead, but works without faith are also dead. Okay, number 6, what do we learn from this? Let me try to summarize before ending. Okay, the other thing, number 6, the human brain does not understand faith. Okay, what does that mean? The brain works with sight. Not so. The brain works with what the eyes can see and process. The brain works with what the nose can smell, and the brain works with what the ears can hear. The brain works with what the tongue can taste, what the skin can feel. The brain works with what the 5 senses can perceive. So if the 5 senses cannot perceive anything, the brain does not understand it. So that's why the brain does not understand faith, because our 5 senses cannot perceive faith. And that's why St. Paul tells us in Hebrews 11:1, we walk by faith, not by sight. We walk by faith, not by sight. So that's why the brain cannot understand faith, because the brain works with the 5 senses. And faith is somehow like a 6th sense. It works with the spiritual 6th sense. It doesn't work with, the 5 senses. So if you are going to live a life of faith, you need to learn to listen to your soul, more than the brain. And you see, there's one thing funny about the human beings, as the human being and human nature, is that the brain wants to protect you. It doesn't want you to die. The brain was designed to protect you. Now, the heart on the other side was designed to experience life, to feel. The heart wants to feel things. The brain wants to protect you. So that's the difference. The heart wants experience. The heart wants to feel things. The heart wants to love and to be loved. The brain wants you to be alive. I see. The brain wants to protect you. So they will always conflict. These two will always conflict. That's why the brain will tell you, no, don't talk to her. Don't go there. Don't text her. What will the heart say? Talk to her. Text her. I see. What will the brain say? Don't listen to him. He's lying to you. He's going to hurt you. What will the heart say? Give him a chance. I see. What will the brain say? Don't start the business. It is risky. What will the heart say? You start the business. Something good may come out of it. The heart wants to experience life. The heart wants to feel alive, because that's what the heart is for. The brain wants to protect you. It doesn't want you to die. It doesn't want you to feel pain. So those two always conflict. So what brings harmony within those two is the soul, actually. If the soul can take over both of the two, the soul can bring about order within both of them. So that's why you need to listen to the soul more than the heart and the mind, because the soul can direct you more than these two, because the soul can see what these two don't see. These ones are limited. The soul is unlimited, So I think we need to go back to listening to our souls more than we listen to the brain and the heart. I think especially in the modern world today, we listen more to the brain and we listen more to the heart. And if you look around advertisement, if you look around the internet, they encourage you to listen to your heart and to listen to your brain. Yeah, it's but also listen to your soul. People rarely talk about the soul, but listen to the soul. because it's the soul that can bring order between this and this. It is the soul that can bring the order. It is the soul that can harmonize. It is the soul that can bring out the higher self, and listen to the higher self in you, And the soul is quiet most of the times, and the soul loves to speak in the quiet. But what happens? We are surrounded by a lot of noise. We are surrounded by noise everywhere. So that's why you need to cultivate a culture of, moving away from noise so that you can listen to the soul, Move away from noise a bit, do things that quiet your mind. And one of them is reading. Reading is good. Reading can quiet your mind. Reading helps us to focus and to concentrate. Reading is good. You can find something you read, maybe it's a book or an article, Reading is a very good thing. Like, it helps you to focus and to quiet down. Then prayer and meditation. Prayer and meditation is also good. It actually helps you to focus down. And then also there's deep work. Like deep work, if you can work deeply and you go into that state of quietness and you're deep working, that's also good. The soul can speak ideas. And then working out is also good. It's a way of quieting yourself down, Maybe when you're running, jogging, when you're in a gym, That's why for me I don't agree with putting on headsets while working out. I've never agreed with that, And I'm not saying you should, do what I say you should do. If it works for you, it's okay. But for me, I don't encourage it. Even when you're running or working out in the gym, it's not good to, be in headsets because the headsets distract you. You don't connect to your body well when you're working out. Or when you're taking a walk. A deep walk. Like don't remove the headsets. Like walk and interact with nature. Feel like being alive. When you are jogging or you're taking a walk or you are, like remove that noise. The soul wants to speak through that. But it's difficult for your soul to speak to you because each time you are maybe listening to something, you are, there's a lot of distraction and noise. So the soul is very quiet. And the soul speaks through quietness. And you see it all the way throughout the Bible, You see it all the way throughout the Bible. Like, even God speaks through the still small voice, Like, when he was speaking to Elijah on the mountain, it was a still small voice. When God was speaking to Moses, still small voice, Like, so the soul, the things of the soul are always quiet things. They are not noisy things, quiet things. Quiet things, like quiet. So you need to cultivate a culture of being quiet with yourself. So listen to the soul more and let the soul speak. And what encourages me about this is that we think we are the ones who are looking for God, but God is also looking for us in the quiet. God is also looking for us, And I can tell you this: if you look at John chapter 4, 23, what Jesus tells the Samaritan woman, it is that's why I get this, because I'm not saying this from my own mind. I'm saying this from the scriptures. Let us read John chapter 4, 23 and see what I'm trying to tell you. So Jesus tells the woman, but you remember Jesus was with the Samaritan woman on the well. You can go and read the stories in John chapter 4. So Jesus tells the woman, but the hour is coming and the hour is now here when true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. And indeed, the Father seeks such people to worship him. Let me read that again if you're not listening. And indeed, the Father seeks such people to worship him. The Father seeks such people to worship him. I see. Like, the hour is coming and the hour is now where true worshippers will worship God in spirit and in truth. And indeed, God seeks such people to worship him. What does that mean? It means we are seeking God, but God is also seeking us, and God is seeking true worshippers who will worship him in spirit and in truth. Okay? So, what I can say in with this is you quiet yourself down and allow God to find you. Allow God to find you. Be quiet, still small voice. Allow God to find you, Allow God to find in this world where there's a lot of noise. Learn how to quiet yourself down and allow God to find you. Allow God to find you, like, because God is already looking for. That's the good news, God is already looking for you. God is already looking for you. So we are not looking in vain. We are looking for someone who is also looking for us. That's beautiful, That's so beautiful. Because all along, that was my mentality, and all along that's the mentality of most people. We are the ones who are looking for God, and God doesn't want to be found. And so we look harder and harder. But the Bible has reassured that Jesus reassures us that we are not the only ones who are looking for God. God is also looking for us. So you quiet yourself down, make it a habit to be quiet with your soul and allow God to find you, Be quiet, read the scriptures, meditate upon them, Allow God to find you, because God is also looking for us as much as we are looking for Him, okay? You seek, but also keep quiet and listen, and allow God to find. That's why Jesus says when you are praying, don't babble very many words, Don't babble, like, speak, then listen, be quiet, and let God find you, okay? The last one, number 6, what does it teach us about faith? That faith is a shield. That's why in Ephesians, 6:10, what does 10 to 11, what does Paul tells us when he's talking about the arm of God? He says, take up the shield of faith to quench the burning arrows from the enemy. So lastly, faith is a shield. Faith is a shield, okay? Before that, if you look at Ephesians, before Paul talks about the arm of God, there's something interesting Paul says. He says, put on the arm of God, okay? So that you may be able to stand firm against the tactics of the devil. And this is what Paul says. For our struggle is not with the flesh and blood, but with the principalities, with the powers, and with the world rulers of darkness, with evil spirits in heavenly places, okay? So our war is not against flesh and blood, it's against spirits. And it goes back to what we are saying, the spiritual world influences the physical world more than we know. Because it is the spiritual world that created the physical world, This world we are in was created by the spiritual world. That means the spiritual world still has much influence on us. That's why when you see people behaving and doing things in different ways, in most cases it's not them, it is the spirits that are doing that through them, It's the spirit that are planting ideas in them and doing that through them, The spiritual world influences us more than we think, and we should acknowledge that. So, if Jesus tells us faith is like a shield for us in the spiritual world, what does that mean? What does that mean? Because faith within itself is like a vehicle. Faith is like a vehicle. Let me give you an example. In the Bible, when Jesus was healing people, what was the final thing He told them before He let them go? He told them, your faith has saved you. Your faith has made you well. Not so. Your faith has made you well. Your faith. So it means faith is like a vehicle. And I think the woman who had a bleeding brings out this very well. The woman who touched his cloak and she got healed. It's almost like the power of Jesus was responding to her faith. Because Jesus healed her without even knowing that He was healing her. That's why He asked the disciples, who has touched me? Power has gone out of me. So His power was responding to her faith. What does that mean? That means the power of God responds to our faith. That's what Jesus said, faith can move mountains. So what does that mean? That means faith brings the shield to us. And what is the shield? The shield is God. So faith is like a means of transport that brings the shield to us. Faith is like a transportation that brings the power of God to us. I see. So that's why faith is a shield, because faith brings the shield, our strength and shield, that is God Himself. So, okay? So that's why faith is the shield, because faith brings something bigger than us to protect us, So that's it. So that's the 7 things we learn from that about faith, okay? The first is faith is unconditional. We should not put conditions on faith, because God doesn't put conditions on grace. Faith isn't what it looks like. Faith isn't a performance. We don't perform faith, we live faith. Faith, only God can acknowledge faith, not anyone else. And faith without works is dead, but works without faith are also dead. And then the human brain does not understand faith. And lastly, faith the shield. Yes, I know it has been a long one, but I hope you've learned something. And yes, God bless. Thank you for sticking around. See you in the next one. Thank you.